What's the stupid saying they say in every state and region of the country? If you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes and it'll change. Well, the political equivalent is, if you don't like today's smear campaign, just wait 5 minutes and it'll be revealed that the accusers are actually doing it themselves and have been the whole time. How could you be so irresponsible with classified information? Biden lectures Trump while he's got a classic Corvette trunk full of it dating back decades. How could you pressure our most cherished ally, Ukraine, for a personal political favor? That was the basis for an entire impeachment proceeding, years after the current president openly bragged about pressuring Ukraine for a personal political favor in the form of the firing of an inconvenient prosecutor. And of course, the whole thing has since become an unaudited $100 billion slush fund of your money. Safe to assume it's funding plenty of personal political favors more, but don't worry, I'm sure it bought at least a few bags of groceries for the front line. Sorry that groceries for you have become so outrageously expensive. And never forget, they screeched, "You're killing people," by breathing freely in public, but now there is absolutely zero curiosity allowed about young, healthy people dropping dead suddenly. Sure, that very fear was the entire basis for upending all of society and berating you into compliance, but now that it's arrived in a different form, well, who cares? It's actually completely normal. You just never noticed it before. Whatever the latest outrage and fear and smear campaign is, you can bet that those pushing it the hardest are committing it themselves. It really is a shame that irony has become so devalued lately. It's in such oversupply that we get desensitized to it, because this latest example truly is at the top of a very crowded shelf. Headline: former senior FBI official accused of working for Russian he investigated. And actually, this headline is incomplete with all the relevant details. It should read, "Guy who investigated Russian collusion arrested and charged for Russian collusion," because the corruption of getting a payout from the guy you're investigating, or at least investigated previously, is only a small piece of this scandal, but it is the piece for which there are now criminal charges. Charles McGonigal is a former FBI counterintelligence chief. He retired from the Bureau in 2018, but he's now one of the highest-ranking FBI officials ever to face criminal charges. He was indicted in federal court in Manhattan on charges of money laundering and violating U.S. sanctions against Russia, accepting $25,000 monthly payments indirectly in exchange for political favors for a Russian oligarch. In a separate indictment filed in Washington, McGonigal is also charged with crimes related to secret cash payments totaling nearly $250,000 from a man working for an Albanian intelligence agency. In that situation, he is also accused of swinging political favors in exchange for the payout. McGonigal pleaded not guilty on Monday afternoon. He was released on a $500,000 bond. No word yet on if Russian oligarchs financed that arrangement too. So what are the specifics? Well, Charles McGonigal's last post with the FBI was leading the counterintelligence unit in New York City. He was a top spy hunter for the FBI, as the Washington Post characterizes it. Oleg Deripaska is a Russian billionaire, the founder of one of Russia's largest industrial companies. He also established one of Russia's largest charities in recent years. He has also served in executive roles at a Russian energy company and a Russian aluminum company, though he has since left those offices. And of course, as is likely the case for most, if not all, successful businessmen in that country, he is closely allied with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In his role as super important FBI spy hunter guy, Charles McGonigal was tasked with investigating Deripaska to keep us safe from all the intrusive Russian interference back then. Make sure Deripaska doesn't hack any voting machines or whisper his orders into Ivanka's ear or any of the other alarmist accusations of the time. But seriously speaking, it is probably wise, as a matter of foreign policy, to keep eyes on heavily influential foreign billionaires to make sure they don't unfairly tinker with U.S. business or U.S. politics. The trouble is, after investigating, McGonigal apparently said, you know what, let me in on that tinkering, actually. Give me some of those tinker bucks, or at least that is the accusation. McGonigal left the FBI and started working for the law firm Deripaska had retained to represent his interests. That's right, the cop in charge of monitoring the gang left to go join the gang. The business arrangement was McGonigal agreed to investigate one of Deripaska's business rivals, presumably to get him in trouble with regulators, as well as try to get Deripaska off a U.S. sanctions list in exchange for a cash payment laundered as a consulting fee. The problem is such payments were prohibited by, well, U.S. sanctions. In 2018, the U.S. applied sanctions against Deripaska and other Russian oligarchs, economic penalties for acting on behalf of Putin, and restrictions on doing U.S. business. To get around these sanctions, Deripaska instead did business in the U.S. using intermediaries, shell companies, to move money and evade U.S. regulators. He did it in the context of his business operations, which is why he was indicted in September, and it's exactly what he did for these political favors too. Deripaska paid McGonigal through shell companies, and signatures were forged to conceal how these payments were exchanged. In other words, ex-FBI guy McGonigal accepted foreign money in violation of U.S. law to advance Russian interest and undercut that of the United States, exactly the sort of Russian collusion we've heard sensationalized by the FBI and the intel community and their media allies for years, but the degree of hypocrisy is actually much deeper and more specific than that. It's not just about a bureau crazed by Russian collusion hysteria. It's about this guy specifically. McGonigal isn't just a former FBI agent or even just a former high-level FBI official. To some degree, he was personally involved in the origin of the Russian collusion narrative and investigation. Arguably, he had a role in launching it. McGonigal was among the first FBI officials to learn that George Papadopoulos, a 2016 Trump campaign advisor, told an Australian diplomat that Russia had political dirt on Hillary Clinton. Remember, Papadopoulos was the origin of this entire multi-year saga. Papadopoulos prompted the FBI's original Crossfire Hurricane Trump-Russia collusion investigation in 2016. That led to the Pissgate dossier. That led to the bogus FISA spying on Carter Page. That led to the firing of James Comey. That led to the Mueller investigation. Papadopoulos is the origin of the nearly 3-year-long investigation that never demonstrated what it set out to, that the Trump campaign team conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. McGonigal was personally involved in that origin. An FBI official told the Senate Judiciary Committee in 2020 that he received a July 2016 email from McGonigal which reported on Papadopoulos and served as the basis for opening the case. McGonigal also emailed colleagues about talking to Carter Page about Russia in 2017, this part of the ongoing investigation and FISA spying, and it appears that McGonigal was personally involved in that process as well. Reportedly, he had some involvement with the requests to renew the surveillance warrants, and of course, half of those were later determined to be legally invalid due to errors in the applications rendering them insufficient to establish probable cause. The simpler term is lying, of course, but maybe McGonigal is just part of a team of tough cops. Better to be too aggressive against foreign influence than it is to be too lenient, they might say. Well, one, that's undercut by cashing checks from foreign influence, but two, it doesn't appear that McGonigal was an equal opportunity investigator. The crimes aren't inherently worthy of aggressive investigation. Only certain people are. McGonigal was also party to a list of FBI officials in receipt of a 2015 memo about a, quote, classified defensive briefing given to the Clinton campaign's lawyers about attempts by foreign governments to influence the candidate through lobbying efforts and campaign contributions. A warning, in other words, for what to look out for. But notably, the FBI never gave the Trump campaign any such briefing. They saw the Russian collusion coming, they just didn't see fit to warn those they eventually accused of engaging in it. Well, so what? The Russian collusion true believers might say. Even if the investigation wasn't handled perfectly, it still produced several convictions and guilty pleas. George Papadopoulos, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone. Never mind that these were almost all obstruction or false statement charges, not charges directly related to the underlying claim of Russian collusion, but still, it got the wrongdoers, they might say. Okay, but the trouble is there's now a growing list of confirmed comparable wrongdoing on the side of the investigators, too. McGonigal is now the fourth major FBI official leading the Trump-Russia collusion investigation to face criminal charges or end up under investigation himself. Former FBI lawyer Kevin Kleinsmith pleaded guilty to altering an email to justify the Carter Page spying. FBI supervisory agent Curtis Hyde testified last year he's under internal investigation for misconduct, including improperly handling a surveillance warrant, potentially withholding exculpatory evidence from the FISA court. The DOJ Inspector General referred former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe for criminal investigation after determining he lied 4 times in questioning about an improper leak to the media, though prosecutors declined to file charges in that case. And now you have McGonigal accused not just of misconduct, but of crime. And crime of the exact sort that he was personally investigating for years. And if you read examples of major media coverage of this story, McGonigal's personal involvement with the Trump-Russia investigation is either buried or omitted entirely. ABC, NBC, the AP, no mention of McGonigal's involvement with the Trump investigation at all. Instead, he's just an ex-counterintelligence agent of no particular significance beyond that. CNN, CBS, The Washington Post, they acknowledge Trump indirectly, but only to implicate him. See, Paul Manafort was connected to this Russian oligarch too. Never mind that the guy actually charged with Russian collusion now is a guy who quite possibly helped launch the investigation against Manafort in the first place. That's irrelevant. And if you notice that glaring omission, well, congrats, you're eating up Republican fodder. This according to USA Today, who doesn't care to disclose the degree to which McGonigal was involved in the Russian collusion investigation. Just that information will likely be politically useful to Republican members of Congress. Or it's fodder for people just generally interested in the complete truth. I don't have to love Lindsey Graham or Mitch McConnell to have a few questions about what happened here. The New York Times does the best of the bunch. If you read all the way down to paragraph 24 of their reporting, you will find a shocking revelation. McGonigal had, quote, a role in the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. What role exactly? Oh, he just helped spy on a guy that he suspected of doing something that he himself went on to do years later if he wasn't already doing it at the time. It's really not that important other than to demonstrate that our federal law enforcement agency is a complete sham that weaponizes its power to punish its enemies while protecting its own interests to abuse us further. Other than that, it's really just a side piece of the story. With coverage like this, who needs a PR firm? The real collusion is not with Russia, even if the Russian checks in this case were nice and fat. The real collusion is the DC Power Center and mass media running cover for them at the expense of the truth. That is a situation with zero check on power. In fact, it's the amplification of it, in total violation of the entire reason we protect a free press in the first place, to hold power centers to account, not sweet talk the story for them. I don't say that to advance my own perspective. Perhaps I'm wrong in my suspicion, and maybe McGonigal's involvement in the Russian collusion investigation really is overblown, and maybe this really is just Republican fodder. Great. Tell me how. Show me how. Don't just label it irrelevant and move on. Bring the evidence. Show the receipts. Because for now, all we have are forged signatures on massive foreign checks to a guy who we as a country trusted to investigate and prosecute that sort of thing. If I'm overzealous in my suspicion of that arrangement, I will happily take that criticism over being foolishly naive. If you listened every time these people said, move along, nothing to see here over the last few years, hopefully by now you've considered maybe it's worthwhile to try the opposite of their advice. Stop and ask a few questions instead. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Parler. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it.